There's a version of yesterday's Raiders minicamp story that's already written itself across every NFL feed you follow. Fernando Mendoza struggled, Aidan O'Connell threw a pick, the quarterback room had a collectively rough afternoon. If that's all you caught, I get it. Those are the facts, and they're not wrong. But I've been sitting with the full picture for the last several hours, turning it over, and I'm convinced the actual story of what happened in that practice has almost nothing to do with the part everyone's reacting to. There's something building in Las Vegas right now that I think most people are completely missing, and some of it genuinely caught me off guard. Let me start with Mendoza, because I'd rather go directly at it than let it sit in the background like a cloud over everything else. He took first-team reps yesterday, and the accuracy simply wasn't there. Ball placement was off, noticeably off compared to what reporters who've been watching this camp all week had documented in earlier sessions. The pass rush got into his face multiple times, with Malcolm Koonce and J.J. Pagas winning their individual matchups convincingly enough that in a live game, both of those reps end in sacks. When that's the story coming out of a minicamp session for a first overall pick, the reaction is completely predictable. Panic, second guessing, the whole maybe this franchise made a mistake machine starts spinning, and for Raiders fans who have lived through enough disappointment to last multiple lifetimes, it doesn't take much to send that narrative into overdrive. I understand that reaction, genuinely, but I can't let it go unchallenged because the framing underneath it doesn't hold up analytically. This is a rookie quarterback, first NFL offseason, taking live competitive reps against a projected first-team defensive unit. If you think about what practice is actually supposed to do, not showcase polish, but expose gaps, apply pressure, force young players face-to-face with the specific moments where their game still needs work, then what happened yesterday was practice doing exactly what it should. A minicamp where Mendoza glided through every rep without difficulty would concern me more, because it would mean either the defense wasn't genuinely pushing him, or the scenarios weren't designed to test anything real. The mistakes themselves are not the signal. The signal is always what comes next. And what came next is what I keep coming back to, because Mendoza's post-game availability was one of the more revealing things I've seen from a young quarterback in a while. He stood in front of reporters and he was specific. Not the defense made some good plays deflection. Not the I just need to keep working non-answer that tells you precisely nothing. He talked about frustration. Real frustration, the internal kind, and then he went somewhere with it that most players his age can't articulate. He described a deliberate process, going back to his notes after practice, identifying recurring themes in his errors, building a mental correction loop before those mistakes can calcify into habits. And then he said something that actually stopped me. He talked about the danger of playing tense, about how the desperate urgency to not make a mistake can become the very mechanism that manufactures one, because your instincts get filtered through anxiety instead of operating cleanly. Every athlete at every level who has been in a high-pressure situation knows exactly what that phenomenon feels like. Most of them can't put words to it with that kind of clarity until they're 5, 6, 7 years into their career. Mendoza is doing it now, before he's played a single regular season snap. That's not a minor detail. There's a deeper point buried in what he said that I want to stay with for a moment, because I think it speaks to something about quarterback development that the public conversation almost always skips over. The quarterbacks who wash out of this league, or who stick around for a few years and then plateau and never become what the draft capital spent on them was supposed to buy. They are very often not the ones who lack physical ability. The league is full of physically gifted quarterbacks who couldn't make it. The ones who break down are the ones who can't construct a sustainable internal process for moving through failure. The guys who carry a bad throw into the next series. The ones who start making decisions from a place of self-protection rather than aggression. The ones who let the weight of a mistake compress their decision-making until everything they do is shaped by fear of the next one, until the game shrinks around them rather than opening up. That psychological trap catches talented players all the time, and it doesn't announce itself loudly. It's gradual. A player gets cautious. His instincts get filtered through anxiety. He starts checking down before he's really looked. He stops trusting his legs, stops trusting his arm, stops trusting the reads he made in the film room. And by the time it becomes visible to the outside, it's usually already too deep to dig out of cleanly. Mendoza is describing the exact opposite architecture. He's describing a self-imposed, deliberate, repeatable system for processing mistakes analytically instead of emotionally, pulling the actual correction out of the experience and walking back onto the field with his confidence structurally intact rather than situationally dependent on how the last play went. You cannot install that in someone who isn't already wired for it. Coaches can point to it, coordinators can encourage it, but it has to come from inside the player. The fact that Mendoza is already operating from that place this early in his career matters far more to me than any single rough afternoon in a spring practice ever could. Kirk Cousins standing on the sideline observing all of this is a subplot that consistently gets about 5 seconds of attention in these daily summaries, and I think that's genuinely short-sighted. He wasn't working in team periods yesterday. He was watching, processing, functioning as a senior presence in that quarterback room while the younger players logged their reps. The reflexive reaction to that image is that it signals the end of Cousins' relevance in Las Vegas, that the organization is already pivoting away from him, that his role is shrinking towards ceremonial. I want to offer a different frame, because I think that one is lazy. Think about what Kirk Cousins actually is at this point in his career. He's a quarterback who has operated at a high level inside genuinely complex offensive systems for over a decade. He's navigated deep playoff runs, survived organizational transitions, rebuilt himself after stretches of real adversity, and spent years learning how to manage the specific internal pressure that comes with playing one of the most scrutinized positions in professional sports. That accumulated experience, that lived understanding of the terrain, is not a passive presence in a quarterback room. It's a resource that most young quarterbacks in this league would give almost anything to have within arm's reach. Lessons that Mendoza would otherwise have to absorb through actual game failures with real consequences attached to them, he gets to work through in practice with someone who has already been through every version of it, standing close enough to ask questions. The value of that organizational structure is real, and it genuinely doesn't show up in any box score or depth chart graphic. Now let me shift to the part of yesterday that has me most energized, because as much as the quarterback narrative is going to own the headlines for another news cycle, there is a defensive story developing in Las Vegas that I think is being dramatically undercovered. Key Walker has been a constant presence in the most interesting practice reports coming out of this entire minicamp, not as a footnote, not as a name that appears in a list of contributors, but as a central figure in the descriptions of what this defense is actually becoming. And when I started looking closely at the specific language being used around him, including language coming directly from defensive coordinator Rob Leonard, I started paying attention in a different way. Leonard called him an avatar, that specific word. In the context of a defensive scheme, that terminology means something precise and consequential. It means a player who can inhabit multiple roles authentically enough that an offensive coordinator cannot pre-solve him, cannot look at where he's aligned before the snap and know with confidence what he's going to do, because he truthfully represents multiple threats simultaneously, depending on the down, distance, formation, and matchup. Building a defense around players with that property is how you create the kind of structural uncertainty that wins you games at the margins, the close games, the ones where the difference between a championship roster and a good but not quite roster actually lives. Walker himself spoke about it in a way that made me pay even closer attention, because his attitude toward the complexity is exactly what you need from a player being asked to carry that kind of schematic weight. He's playing more positions in this system than he's been asked to play at any point in his career. For some players, that request creates anxiety, a sense of being spread thin, of not being allowed to master any single thing because the coaching staff keeps pulling you in different directions. Walker talked about it as something he's actively craved. He framed the versatility not as a burden but as an opportunity he's been waiting for. The chance to be the kind of linebacker who can move around a field and change the shape of a play from different alignments rather than being a fixed piece in a predetermined structure. That mindset matters enormously in a system that is asking its players to hold multiple assignments simultaneously and execute them under live game pressure. You can design the most sophisticated defensive scheme in the league, but if the players inside it are executing their assignments mechanically without understanding the purpose behind them, the whole thing becomes fragile the moment an offense does something unexpected. Walker's enthusiasm for the complexity, his genuine desire to be the most complex piece on that board, is the energy that a rebuilding defense needs at the center of its identity. Jeremy Chin and Taron Johnson are also being mentioned in the context of multi-position usage, which reinforces the sense that Leonard is building this defense around a coherent philosophy rather than just populating slots on a depth chart. The Raiders' defense for too long operated in a way that allowed offenses to solve it before the game started. You could identify the coverage, find the pressure, and distribute the ball with a level of pre-snap confidence that a defense should never surrender. What's being described from these practice sessions is a unit being deliberately constructed to remove that pre-snap certainty, to present problems that offensive coordinators have to solve in real time rather than in the film room the week before. That shift from a defense that executes to a defense that genuinely confuses is one of the most meaningful transformations a struggling franchise can initiate on that side of the ball. Walker is the centerpiece of it, and the fact that he understands what he's being asked to be and wants it is a very good sign. Cody Lindenberg deserves a specific mention because he's been quietly building a case for himself across this entire camp, and it's starting to register with the people watching most closely. With Nakobe Dean sitting out, Lindenberg has been running with the first-team linebacker group, and the reports coming out are not describing someone just filling a spot while the starter rests. He's making plays, getting specific praise. Positioning himself as a player the coaching staff is going to have to genuinely account for when depth chart decisions get made in training camp. Healthy competition at every level of a roster forces coaches to make real evaluations rather than predetermined ones, and it keeps veterans from coasting on the assumption that a role is already theirs. Lindenberg is generating that kind of productive pressure right now, and given the competitive culture this staff appears to be deliberately constructing, that's exactly what they should want happening. On the absences, both Nakobe Dean and quarterback Jamal McCoy sitting out again, same as day one of this camp. I want to acknowledge them without inventing a crisis around them. The coaching staff has been direct that neither situation carries significant concern attached to it, and I'm going to take that at face value. Off-season practices include rest days and maintenance days and sessions where a player is managing something minor that will be fully resolved before anything consequential is happening. Building drama around an absence when the people who actually have the information are saying it isn't one is not analysis. It's noise manufactured to fill space, and I'd rather spend the time on things that are genuinely telling us something real. The Brandon Johnson signing is the last piece I want to address because it landed quietly, and I think it rewards a closer look than it's getting. Released by Pittsburgh recently after 2 seasons there, and 1 prior in Denver, Johnson is not the marquee receiver addition this fan base has been asking for, and I want to be direct about that rather than oversell it. His career numbers, 26 catches for 335 yards across 23 games, with the most productive stretch coming in Denver in 2023, where he was averaging nearly 15 yards per catch. Describe a player with real big play capability when he gets genuine opportunities, not a proven weekly contributor. The surface read on this move is easy to dismiss, but the details underneath the signing are more interesting than the name recognition suggests, and they're mostly about relationships. Johnson played under Clint Kubiak when Kubiak was coordinating Denver's passing game in 2022. Wide receiver coach Zach Azzanni goes back even further with Johnson, recruited him at Tennessee, then coached him at multiple NFL stops after that. That's a substantial web of shared professional history between a player and the people who will be evaluating him. And in a league where every roster decision is being made under time pressure and competitive intensity, that kind of familiarity has genuine practical value. He walks into training camp already understanding what this staff values, already knowing how they want things done, already past the adjustment period that most players need when they enter a new system. That's a real edge in a competition where the distance between the 53-man roster and the practice squad can be impossibly thin. Beyond the fit and the familiarity, Johnson brings a physical profile that's specifically useful in the red zone, the kind of size that changes the math for defensive backs trying to compete for the football in a compressed space where every inch matters. Whether he gets enough opportunities to demonstrate that depends entirely on whether he can win one of the contested spots at the bottom of the depth chart against Dante Thornton, Jack Besh, and rookie Malik Benson, none of whom have any guarantees either. It's a sensible, low-noise, high-familiarity depth addition, and if he doesn't make the 53, the same relationships that brought him here make it likely he stays in the building on the practice squad, available when the injury attrition that comes with every NFL season eventually opens something up. What I'm left with after watching this camp play out is something more textured than panic and more grounded than pure optimism. Mendoza had a difficult day, and the response to it told me something genuinely encouraging about who he is as a competitor. The defense is building towards something that feels meaningfully different from what this franchise has put on the field in recent memory, with Key Walker operating as a schematic weapon at the center of it rather than just a quality linebacker in a fixed role. The competition across this roster is real, which means the coaches are going to face actual decisions rather than just confirming what was already decided before camp opened. And the organizational texture that's starting to emerge, the accountability, the self-awareness from young players, the veteran intelligence shaping the culture from the inside, feels constructed, not accidental. Training camp is going to be worth watching very closely.